I drove 58 miles for just 50 pence. That's less than 1p per mile. And no, it's not a trick. It's not even down to free electricity. Most people trying to cut costs are looking at one side of the coin, and I'm going to show you the other. Because what really decides what a journey costs comes down to a few small things that most drivers never even think about. Let me show you. This is my car. It's a 2020 Tesla Model 3, specifically the 4-wheel drive dual motor version. It's not as fast as the performance variants, and it's not as efficient as the lighter standard range rear-wheel drive versions, but it does strike a solid balance between the two. I've owned it since it was new, and I feel fortunate enough to have been driving it for nearly the last 6 years now. If you're looking to transition to electric vehicles, these exact models are available to buy for as little as $15,000 these days. It has a rated efficiency of 257 watt-hours per mile, which is just under 4 miles per kilowatt-hour. Today I'm going to explain how I achieve up to 50% better efficiency than the manufacturers claim, and how you can too. And I'm talking about real journeys. My daily 29-mile commute from my home just outside Coventry to my workplace in central Birmingham. Not a specifically designed downhill eco run where speeds are limited to say 30 miles an hour. I'm talking about a round trip which consists of both congested inner city driving and also motorway. The first tip is how to benefit the most from regenerative braking, or regen for short. For those who are new to electric vehicles, this is the ability for the car to reduce its speed relative to the reduction in the application of the throttle. It does this by taking the kinetic energy from motion and redirecting it back into the battery. You might have heard some contrasting opinions on this one. Some will claim you want the most powerful regen possible, to maximise the amount of energy that goes back into the battery. Others will claim you want to use as little regen as possible. So here's the crazy bit. Both points of view are entirely correct. How can that be? Most electric cars will have a dial prominently showing you the energy consumption and regen. Pay very close attention to this. In nearly all cases, you want to keep that as central as possible to maximise the efficiency. This means gentle acceleration and gentle regenerative braking tends to be best. This is the case because the more significant the energy flow in either direction, drawing from or back into the battery, the higher the amount of energy losses. And loss equals inefficiency. Energy which could have been used is sadly wasted. It's small numbers ultimately. The regenerative braking systems on modern electric vehicles generally do a great job of recouping most of that energy, but keeping its usage quite gentle does result in gains. But here's where strong regen is useful, crucial even. Whenever you need to use the friction brake, the energy is completely wasted. When you need to decelerate quickly, you'll want the regenerative braking to do all the work. The stronger the capability for regen is, the higher the proportion of driving scenarios where regen can reduce the speed of the vehicle by itself without ever needing to touch that friction brake. Let's compare the two situations. Using the friction brake loses all the energy that could have been transferred back into the battery. Using large amounts of regen, on the other hand, it results in some small losses relative to the amount of power transfer, but those are minor. So to sum it up, I would put it like this. You want the capability of regenerative braking to be as strong as possible, but you want to use it as sparingly as possible. With that knowledge of how best to use regen, it opens up an opportunity to change driving philosophy to take the benefits even further. Ultimately, the goal becomes to avoid using the friction brake entirely and let the regen do all the work. Increasing the gap to the car in front can extend the amount of time and distance you have to reduce your own speed, should the car in front unexpectedly slow down. It's sometimes possible to anticipate traffic lights when they might change, giving you time to reduce speed in a smoother manner, avoiding those unexpected stops which can hurt efficiency. In some instances, you might even be able to avoid coming to a complete stop too, as that requires that little bit more energy to get moving again. Vehicle manufacturers put huge amounts of efforts into reducing the drag coefficients of their vehicles. This manifests itself in stylistic details such as smooth teardrop style body shapes. integrated door handles, and flat, minimalistic wheel covers. Drag, also known as wind resistance, is a force that acts on your car the faster you drive. The higher the drag, the more force is needed to overcome it, therefore requiring more energy. Because drag squares with speed, a good tip is to slow down slightly. A small reduction of 5 miles per hour from 70 to 65 results in an instant improvement of 10% efficiency from that alone, but it's possible to take this further. Following another vehicle, especially a larger vehicle, reduces the amount of wind resistance. They are effectively punching a big hole in the air, reducing the amount of energy you need to overcome the drag, thus improving efficiency. The perfect scenario here is closely following a lorry on a motorway. Of course, be mindful not to follow too closely, as there are safety considerations, but there are clear and noticeable advantages, around about 3%, to following a lorry when maintaining a 2-second gap. You might also notice that lorry drivers are highly adept at maintaining a consistent speed. Where most lorries are limited to around 56 or 62 miles per hour, that's 90 or 100 kilometers per hour, there are added advantages to combining the reduced speed and aerodynamic gains. A quick word of caution though, don't attempt this on roads with variable speeds, as the benefits will soon be offset by the increased need to modulate your own speed. So how about heating and air conditioning? Let's start off with heating. Naturally, using the heater in cold weather is going to have a big impact on efficiency. In many cases, allowing for around about 1/3 range loss is expected in cold conditions. A large part of this is due to the huge energy draw from heaters. But that doesn't mean you have to freeze if you are trying to drive efficiently. Reducing the temperature a couple of degrees and reducing the fan speed can have a big impact over a full blast max temperature heating setting. But instead of relying on the HVAC, heated seats and steering wheels are a much more efficient form of heating. This is the case because you are not wasting energy on heating the whole cabin, you are just heating the areas you are physically in contact with. It's enough to make you feel warmer without the high energy draw. So what about air conditioning? Once again, the extent of the temperature differential and the fan speed is going to make an obvious difference to the drop in efficiency. But studies have bizarrely shown that at high speeds, if the aim is to maximise efficiency, it can actually be better to use the air conditioning instead of opening the windows. This is due to the increase of drag open windows cause. The crossover speed tends to be around about 45 to 50 miles per hour. So if you're on the motorway, you might actually be better off using air conditioning on a low setting than having your windows open. If outside conditions are comfortable, consider not using heating or air conditioning at all. Many cars feature a fan-only setting, which can be a viable alternative to opening a window. This can be an effective energy saving, particularly at high speeds. On those especially hot or cold days where aircon and heating cannot be avoided, here's a simple trick if you want to take things a little further. Turn it off just a few minutes before you get to your end destination. The internal temperature of the car won't instantly change as soon as you turn it off. It takes a few minutes to transition. So why continuously heat or cool the cabin until the very moment you leave? You're effectively wasting energy on maintaining that desired temperature after you have left. An area often overlooked is tyre pressures. While it's worth keeping an eye on for safety grounds, it also has a notable effect on vehicle efficiency. The amount is often debated, but the popular belief tends to be around about 20% of underinflation often results in 4 to 5% downside in efficiency due to the increased rolling resistance. Underinflation may result in excessive wear to the outer edges, so increased wear costs you more in a different way. So it's well worth you matching the manufacturer recommendations as closely as possible. Of course, it's expected the pressures will rise during a journey and as temperatures warm up, so don't be alarmed if they're quite a bit higher than where they start. If you're unsure what the recommended tyre pressures are, they can be found in the vehicle manual, and often on the inside edge when you open the driver's side door. You might be wondering how these techniques translate to my 29-mile each-way commute, which is 58 miles combined, being as cheap as just 50 pence. Through exercising everything I spoke about in this video, I've regularly been achieving efficiency of around about 160 to 170 watt-hours per mile, which is around about 6.1 miles per kilowatt hour. In April, I was paying just 5.2 pence for each unit of overnight off-peak energy that charges my car, making the resulting price around about 0.85 pence per mile. At that level of efficiency, the full 58-mile round trip costs as little as 50 pence. Now I should explain, as of the start of this month, I will no longer be receiving such a competitive off-peak rate. It's now 6.9 pence per kilowatt hour, which is still better than the 8 pence rate offered for new customers. This is with a tariff called Octopus Intelligent Go, one designed specifically for cheap overnight charging of electric vehicles. Despite the increases, for those who can charge at home, it definitely compares favourably to petrol and diesel. The values I've quoted here today are real numbers, but purely for energy consumption. It's important to note there are of course other cost considerations for every single journey, including insurance, tyres, perhaps even servicing too. And then, in April 2028, there'll be something called VEED, a new tax which affects electric vehicles, which I've done a separate video about. But having the knowledge to drive efficiently is a really great skill to have, regardless of what you choose to drive. I hope this has been useful. Let me know if you have any questions. Do you have any of your own driving efficiency tips you wish to share? And what's the best efficiency you've ever achieved on a single journey? Let me know in the comments, and if you think I've got any of this wrong, let me know. Consider subscribing if you're interested in how electric vehicles, solar and batteries can all work together to save you money. Thanks very much for watching, hope to see you again soon, bye bye.